Happy Pride Month, and welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Do not mind the fact that my thumbnail is broken. It just fell off. I'm getting my nails done tomorrow. It'll be fine. Today, I am coming to you with a wrap-up. I have not done one of these in a long time, since, the middle of January, and obviously it is June now. And my only excuse is that I have been absolutely slammed with work, and I have been so fucking busy and so stressed, and oh god, it's just been a crazy year. It's gone by really fast, all that shit. Oh, yada yada yada, excuses. Regardless, now I have a really long wrap up to offer up, and it's a lot of books that I've read a long time ago, so hopefully I don't have that much to say about it so that this video is not hours long, but you know how it is. I know a lot of you guys will comment on my videos being like, I love your wrap-ups, or your wrap-ups are my favorite videos, so I hope you don't mind, you know? Also, I'm gonna be traveling for a while, most of the summer, honestly, so I don't know how consistent my uploads are gonna be. Just prefacing that in advance. But anyways, those are my disclaimers, and now let's just get into all of the books. The last book that I talked about in my most recent wrap-up, which is my January part 1 video, because I thought I was going to make a part 2 and my goal was to do a part 2 of January plus February wrap-up situation video, but that did not happen, obviously. But the last book that I left off with was Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread, which is right here on my shelf. So the book that I read right after that was, I'm just looking down at my phone here that I have this phone case that all my friends have been making fun of me for. I just need a really heavy duty one because I drop this shit constantly, and if it's not in a brick, the screen will shatter and my phone will stop working, and I have to get a new phone every 3 years at least because, what's the word called? Planned obsolescence? Yeah, because of that, and also in Apple products, but also because I drop my shit all the time. So this is my preventative measures. I just added some stickers to try to make it more girly, whatever. Anyways, yeah, I'm looking down at my phone. That's what's happening. I'm glancing down, looking at my Goodreads. You can friend me on Goodreads if you want. You have to answer my question prompt, though. A lot of people, well, not a lot, but some people will request to friend me on Goodreads, but won't answer my challenge question of, how did you find me? And so I will reject their friend request because I just want to know, do you watch my videos? Did you just find me through a review? Do you listen to my podcast? That situation. Anyways, okay. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This book I rated 3.5 stars, 3 stars. This is a really hyped book. A lot of people really like this. And I, of course, am not immune to hype. You are not immune to propaganda. I am not. And I did read it. I did pick it up. And I thought that it was a cozy fantasy. And that is what it was marketed as. That's what people were talking about it as. And it was accurately marketed as such because that's exactly what it was. And it was sweet for what it was, but honestly, it was a little forgettable for me. I don't necessarily remember everything that happened except that there was a little romance between an orc and a succubus, and there was a coffee shop, of course, Legends and Lattes, that was called Legends and Lattes, and it's based off of League of Legends, the video game. I feel like video game spin-offs in books, TV, and movies have been really popular as of late. I don't know. Gamers have been on the up and up in terms of cultural trends, popularity, and cachet as of late, I've noticed. But anyways, yeah, I thought this was fine, and if you're interested in reading a cozy fantasy, you should just pick this up because it would be up your alley. If you feel like you would like it, you will, The next book that I read was The Hop by Diana Clark, which is a novel that follows this, I think, New Zealand woman who moves to Nevada and starts working at a brothel, and it's basically looking at the world of prostitution and living and working at a brothel and the employee-employer, client-employee dynamics happening there, and sort of all the girls at the Hop, which is what the legal brothel, because Nevada is the only state in the US that has legalized prostitution, what that looks like. And I thought it was a really interesting perspective. Not necessarily perspectives that I agreed with in all its entirety, but I think that the way that it was written, which was these alternating perspectives of this girl who sort of rises to meteoric, how do you say that word? Meteoric fame. She is known as like this glamorous, beautiful, sex worker, and so we see from her perspective like her experiences getting to that position, how she got there, her childhood, her complicated relationship to her mother, who was a bit of a scammer in a legal way, and her relationship to the commodification of like her sexuality growing up. And then we also get the perspectives of like her friends, her childhood friends, other girls at the Hop, and sort of see her childhood and her career. And I thought that it was interesting and pretty engrossing. I tend to find sort of realistic contemporary fiction that takes on multiple perspectives across time like this, sometimes a little bit redundant, inane, annoying, but I found this one quite compelling. And like what I mean by the redundant, inane, annoying part is like I'm just not really compelled to pick it up and keep reading. It's just not something that I'm like, ooh, like I really want to. But this one I was interested. So yeah, I rated it like 3.5 stars as well. And yeah, the audiobook was fun because there's a lot of like New Zealand accents. The different voice actors and stuff were pretty good, I would say. So I would recommend the audiobook. I don't know what people's standards for like audiobook narration and narrators are, but I thought this one was pretty good. Anyways, the next book that I read was a literary fiction contemporary novel called St. Sebastian's Abyss by Mark Haber, which I rated 3 stars, maybe 3.5. I feel like that's a common theme. My wrist just cracked. A 3 to 3.5 star rating. Mostly because like maybe I've just become more critical as a reader. Maybe I'm picking up books that like I like but don't love. After having read nearly 1,000 books that I've logged on Goodreads at this point, I know my taste enough to understand like what genres and what types of books and what types of writing and stuff I will get along with and fuck with and like enjoy. But I'm like, that's not an accurate predictor of like whether I like a book or like love it. So I feel like that's where we're getting these 3 to 3.5 star ratings if we want to do a more of an analysis of that. I'm getting a little chilly. I think I want to go put on a little sweater or something. Also, do you notice my lesbian flag themed color palette today? My shirt has a little strawberry on it, but you can't really tell that that's out of the frame, but if you notice that. This is like a short sleeve sweater, but I find it kind of slayful and I think it's pretty cute, so we're gonna go with this. It's very hot in St. Louis right now and as always incredibly humid, so if I look sweaty it's because I am, but it's like a sweat that is congealing due to the nature of the air conditioning. Oh god. Anyways, that's what's happening, hashtag like on set right now. But anyways, St. Sebastian's Abyss. This book follows a art critic who is really into this painting called St. Sebastian's Abyss. It is a fictional painting, it doesn't exist, and he's an art historian. And his approach to it is very critical, and he's been working in this field for decades. He has a best friend who is also really focused on St. Sebastian's Abyss. They are both huge snobs, art snobs to the highest degree, believe that there are no other paintings in the world that can even be considered art. Only St. Sebastian's Abyss can be considered real, true art. Contemporary, modern art, it's all trash, garbage. The only real art and painting in the world is St. Sebastian's Abyss. And it's been overlooked by scholars and art historians for years until their work and their undergraduate degrees together have emerged and brought it out from the depths of academia. And it is a really funny and interesting an engrossing satire looking at the snobbery of this world, I would say, because they have like a shared love and obsession over this painting, obviously, but they also have a rivalry over who can make the best interpretation of it, and we're getting just the perspective of this one man, and he has been like out of contact with the other guy who's like really into this painting for years now, after he said some like terrible thing about the painting that caused him to have differences that could never align them ever again. But essentially he gets like a letter from this friend, this ex-friend, this ex-coworker, bestie, rival, that is basically like, I'm on my deathbed, come here, I just found some groundbreaking news about St. Sebastian's Abyss that's going to change everything about the way that we think about this painting. We've been thinking about it wrong our whole lives. Oh wait, did I just spoil it? Are we supposed to know that he's on his deathbed? Anyways, it's a very short novella, and it's more about the form than the content in some ways. Well, the content itself is very like funny and entertaining in my opinion as well, but yeah, I thought this was good. I rated it 3 stars, but looking back, I think it's like 3.5. I thought it was solid. I don't know, I think if you are interested in being immersed in the mind of like a snobbish white man who is really into being really into a piece of art, this is something that you would find fun and entertaining the way that I did. The next book that I read, and this was still in the month of January, was Greenland by David Santos Donaldson. And this book is a literary historical magical realism novel that follows a novelist, a gay Egyptian man who is embodying or trying to write about the love affair between E.M. Forster and Muhammad El Adel, which happened in like the early 20th century. This is told from the perspective of like the contemporary novelist who basically like locks himself up in like a room and forces himself to write, and he finds himself getting like embodied by the spirit of Muhammad and like the man who had a gay affair with Forster. He's the guy who wrote Maurice, actually, and he like to the point where the main character starts getting really isolated from his like friends and family and his lover, who is a white man, and there's these issues of like race and sexuality and stuff that are contended with in this novel. I thought that this was really interesting and touching, but it wasn't moving in a way that I think it like wanted to be or it was really seeking to be. So I rated it 3 stars, and I thought it was good for being like a literary fiction, somewhat speculative, historical, transformative novel that is meta-narrative in the way that it's about a novelist writing about a novelist and embodying the experience of trying to write a book and being on a deadline. So I rated it 3 stars. The next book that I read was a campy thriller called Burn It All Down by Nicholas D. Demosio, which I rated like a high 3.5. It wasn't even necessarily like a thriller. Well, I guess, because basically what happens is that this gay Italian boy and his single mom go on like a rampage over their exes for like cheating on them or something like that, and like accidentally commit arson. They have to like run away into this house in the woods, and there's like a little romance love affair situation, but it's mostly about how they're trying to deal with the familial, legal, criminal sort of ramifications of their actions. And it's about this mother-son relationship that is really quirky and fun and heartwarming and touching, and it was really sweet and funny, and it was cute. I liked it. I had a really fun time with it, and it was written with this like humor that was really accessible and commercial, and I liked it. So yeah. The next book that I read was Against the Current by Olivia Matthews, which I listened to the audiobook of through the Libro FM influencer program, so thank you, Libro FM. And this was a cozy mystery novel that I rated 2.5 stars because it was kind of forgettable, but it was what it was, a cozy mystery novel about a bakery that was getting some murder allegations after someone dies. So, I mean, there's not really much to say about it, in my opinion. I just didn't think it was anything special, and it's very typical. It follows that formula of, like, there's a small business, and there's this young woman trying to keep it afloat, and, like, something happens, and she has to try to solve it, but it's dangerous, and her friends and family are like, don't do that. I don't know. It was sweet, but nothing special, necessarily, in my opinion, so yeah, I rated it 2.5 stars. The next book that I read was Nerd Crush by Alicia Emmerich, another Libro FM influencer program audiobook. And this was a young adult contemporary romance. And honestly, I don't remember almost anything about this book except that I didn't really like it because I gave it 2 stars. And I think it's like one of those things that, like, I should probably not read hetero contemporary YA romances, because that's just not what I'm looking for, really. That's not something I'm ever gonna jive with most of the time, I don't think. I don't know. I didn't really like this one, I don't think. And I don't know, maybe you would if you're a YA romance reader. But I rated it 2 stars. The next book that I read was When Trying to Return Home, Stories by Jennifer Maritza Macaulay, a short story collection, obviously. And I rated this one 3.5 stars. And it follows these Black and Afro Puerto Rican characters in these different scenarios. These stories are kind of loosely connected. There is these different characters' perspectives that we're really immersed in. There was this one short story that was about this man who, like, was at this school and, like, really thirsting after this nun character, but he was really like, I'm not machismo like the other men here, like, I respect her, but she's a nun. But then we get the nun's perspective and, like, why she was there, and she's, like, not very serious about it at all. But also, I feel like I kind of blacked out in February when reading, because I don't remember any other stories from this collection besides those 2. But I liked it. I thought the writing was good. I rated it 3.5 stars. The next book that I read was another short story collection called The World Doesn't Require You by Rion Amilcar Scott, which I rated 3 stars. But this one was more memorable. This one was one of the more memorable reads of February 2023, because there is this one short story in here that was about this guy who read someone's, like, cultural American studies or African American studies PhD thesis on a tradition of, like, slave fugitives knocking on people's doors and, like, pranking them, basically. You know, when you, as a kid, when you knock on someone's door and hide in the bushes. And he, like, wrote a whole thesis on how, like, that was, like, a mode of resistance. And our main character is this guy who feels a little lost in his life. I think he's also working on writing a book or something like that, and he's really not going anywhere with it. And he gets sucked in by this thesis, and he and this guy then get into this set of pranks of knocking on people's doors and getting in trouble for it, kind of. And it is very interesting, the way that it explores, like, academia and these 2 people's antics. And there's also a story in here. I'm forgetting if I think this is a short story collection, kind of, but it was more of, like, 2 different novellas that were sort of loosely related, something like that. But the other novella I'm remembering now is about this slave AI robot thing and, like, its master. And basically this book is doing something really interesting about the history of chattel slavery in the US and, like, race, and looking at it in the contemporary and in the future within the context of, like, that history. And I think it does it really in this imaginative, fascinating, really engrossing way. But I rated it 3 stars as opposed to, like, 4, I think, because there were moments where it just kind of lost me. There were some moments that were so engrossing, and there are some moments that that I was like, what is happening? I'm not really connecting with this, and that's why I would say it's actually probably more of a 3.5, but I thought this was quite brilliant, honestly, and you should pick it up. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, it's at the cusp of, like, literary and speculative fiction in this way that is really interesting, and that a lot of contemporary up-and-coming authors are doing something really, really cool with. The book that I read was All Her Little Secrets by Wanda M. Morris, which was a thriller, and I rated this book 2 stars. I don't know, I feel like I'm not really getting along with that many, like, thrillers, like, crime, mystery thrillers this year. All Her Little Secrets by Wanda M. Morris didn't really work for me because it looks into this world of, like, corporate law, and it's quite cynical and critical, of course, and it's from the perspective of this woman who is cynical and critical and pretty self-aware, but the author, or the reader is held at a distance because, of course, she has, like, secrets from her past and stuff. I didn't really find it engaging enough, but I just kept going through it because I was like, oh, this is, like, a crime thriller, like, whatever. But honestly, it wasn't that memorable, and I had to refresh what it was about by, like, looking at the synopsis, and yeah, so I rated it 2 stars. But the next book that I read was another crime thriller that really didn't work for me, but it was honestly a little better, and that was The Jigsaw Man by Nadine Matheson. This book is set in London, and it follows this detective, and she's trying to track down this man who, like, is a murderer and kills people by, like, cutting apart their skin and whatnot, right? Like, you get the vibes from the cover. And I felt like this book was just, like, I wrote this in my Goodreads review. I gave this 2.5 stars because I thought it was well written, and I thought that the characters were somewhat well developed, and the way that the interpersonal conflict and stuff played out was a little interesting and well done. It was very much like a crime drama situation because it felt like well-written propaganda and, like, an episode, or, like, a long episode of, like, SVU or something. Although I've never watched SVU, so I don't know what that means. But yeah, basically she's trying to catch a serial killer. It's causing problems in her marriage. It's a really long book, and it's very much about, like, being a cop and what that looks like when you're in the middle of a case. I rated it 2.5 stars. If that's something that's up your alley, like, you should pick this up because I think it does it pretty well, but it's just not to my taste, so 2.5 stars. The next book that I read was The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston, and this is a memoir that is, like, really foundational for, like, Asian American studies and just Asian American women and, like, feminist, Asian American feminist studies and writing and stuff, and I think, like, as a text that is seminal in that way, I can respect it. Did I enjoy reading it? Not necessarily. I can't say that I did. Okay, that's not necessarily true. I skimmed a lot of this, I feel like. I kind of dived in deeper in some sections, but a lot of it I was, like, just, like, you know, trying to get the texture and feel of it. So I rated it, like, 3 stars, maybe, like, 2.5. I thought it was fine, you know? I think it's something that you should read if you should read it. If you feel like you need to get that grasp of that canon. But yeah, anyways. The next book that I read in the month of February was Finley Donovan Jumps the Gun, which is the 3rd book in the Finley Donovan series by Elle Cosimano. This book I rated 3.5 stars. A lot of people don't really fuck with this book or series anymore as it's progressed, because it's getting, like, more and more, like, ridiculous, and there's more shenanigans, and it's becoming more of, like, a little bit of, like, a romance, something that's happening. There's, like, the Russian mob situation. I just like a lighthearted, silly thriller. Like, give me a woman who is involved in shenanigans and, like, people are dying, perhaps. I mean, I would say I like the 2nd book more, and I love the 1st book, so I get where people are coming from, but I still enjoyed this. I rated it, like, 3.5 stars. I can't really talk about it without spoiling the first 2 books, but it involves a cop civilian training boot camp, which is inherently silly and goofy and ridiculous. and propaganda, as is like the romance narratives in this novel. But you know, like, Finley is a divorced mom, and it's just funny to see her antics. I'll probably continue with the series just to have like something fun and silly and light to put on in the background as an audiobook. But yeah, anyways, the next book that I read was Lost in the Moment and Found, which is the eighth book in the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire. And I rated this book 4.5 stars because it was beautiful, lovely, gorgeous, textured, rich, and a portal fantasy that is amazing. As always, as usual, from the series by Maguire. Like, she did an amazing job as always. Really no criticisms or complaints from me. The reason why I'm not one of the people who like gives all of these books 5 stars the way that a lot of people seem to be is I think like whimsical fantasy is just not necessarily my genre in that way, but it is a genre that I dip in and out of that I really enjoy when I do, and I think it's excellent for what it is. And I thought that this book was great. This is not a series that you need to read in order at all. This is a book that you could totally start with in this like series or collection, because again, it's just like a children's portal fantasy, or it's not for children, like any age group can read it, but it follows these child characters, and it's about this young girl who one day wanders into a like antique shop of like lost things, and time moves differently there. Things in different portals and worlds are different there, and it's really interesting and beautiful and moving, and it's connected to the different universes, and you get glimpses of them in different ways in this book as well. These are all very short novellas. Kayla from Books and Lala has a really lovely vlog where she picks up on like the different Easter eggs and stuff across these different novellas in this series as well, so you should definitely check out that video if you haven't already, and if you're either interested in checking out the series or if you've read all of these books. Like, I found it really delightful to watch as someone who has read all of these books. So anyways, I enjoyed this book a lot, and I rated it 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was Queenie by Candace Carty-Williams, and this is like a disaster girl novel, as My Name is Marinez would say on her channel, and I rated this book 4 stars. I thought it was pretty funny and excellent for being like a contemporary commercial literary fiction novel that follows this young British woman as she is trying to navigate her dating life, her career, her friendship. In this book, we follow Queenie as she gets in these consecutive and various sort of like self-destructive casual sexual relationships with various men in the backdrop of her working as like a journalist in a newspaper. And this is during the Black Lives Matter uprisings happening in the US, and I think around like 2016, and she really wants to do coverage for that for her news organization, but like her editor's really not fucking with it. Like, she's not delivering on the deadlines that she should be, I guess. We're basically just following her as she is a hot fucking mess, and I found it pretty delightful and a good read for someone who feels like such a mess all of the time as like a hashtag girl in her 20s. Like, it's a really real book, and I get why it's really popular and well loved and read. It is very much like a Fleabag enjoyer type of book, and yeah, so I liked it. I rated it 4 stars. And the last book that I read in February was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This book was gorgeous and a classic, of course. I rated it 4 stars because 5-star books are like 5-star books. 4-star books are like, that is an excellent novel. This, I think, is like a 4.5 star book. This is heart-wrenching. It's about desire and disgust and the way these things are so entangled together, and James Baldwin as a writer just gets at it in such a beautiful way. We're following this white American man as he gets involved with this Italian guy in Paris when he's there, like, cavorting around, but our white American dude, he actually is engaged, or like has a female lover, has a girly, and he's sort of feeling lost, and he gets involved with Giovanni, the Italian boy. And we know from the very beginning of this book, and it's pretty short, that like shit went down and something really tragic is happening to Giovanni, and it's just a tragic novel about the homophobia of like the mid 20th century, and the way that like I think whiteness and white maleness and heterosexuality and patriarchy exists in such a way that like forms your psyche against the world and against yourself. And it's beautiful, it's destructive, and we see our main character destroy himself over it. And it's set in this backdrop of like Paris and the gay scene of Paris of this time, this lovely way, because Baldwin himself was inundated with the Parisian scene of this time and knew the gritty sort of working class gay bar scenes of this time, so he depicts it in such a way. Our guy in this book is always borrowing money from people, is always like just skating by on the skin of his teeth. Like, it is stressful to witness, but it's a literary classic. It's a modern 20th century classic for a reason. You should definitely read this if you haven't already. And yeah, it was good. It was a good last read of February, and I would recommend it. The first book that I finished in the month of March was Saltfish Girl by Larissa Lai, which, you know, it's a little bit annotated. Actually, not a little bit. It's quite annotated. I feel like people have been telling me to read this book for a while now, and I get why. It is quite brilliant. It does speculative fiction, magical realism, historical fiction, fantasy, science fiction in this way that is so queer, feminist, Asian American, futurist, anti-capitalist, and it's beautiful. It's moving, and it is wacky, and it's so interesting. I really found this engrossing, although kind of difficult to chew on for your brain initially, and kind of a little bit hard to get through. The alternating perspectives between Miranda and Noah is very interesting because of the way that it plays with like this sort of historical or folklorish setting and a futuristic sciencey one, and the way that these meld together and sort of star-crossed loves. And I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very smart and really explored the themes that it did well, while bringing to such vibrant life these settings and these characters and these different folklores and the olfactory sense of like salt fish. Yeah, people's like literary analysis, you know, comparative literature reviews on JSTOR about this book are really interesting. Honestly, they helped me understand this book in a really interesting way. I feel like this could be a cool book to do a politics of fiction video on if you would like to see that. I know that is a series on this channel that I have been kind of slacking on because it takes a lot of prep for me to do those videos that are often, you know, 30 minutes to like 40 minutes long, and it's really looking at the themes of a book, and I'm trying to look at quotes, and you know, it's basically like a video essay, but less produced in some ways, more produced in others, because it's an essay. Anyway, yeah, but let me know if you want that. Perhaps I like this a lot. I rated it 4 stars, and I thought it was really good. So yeah, I get why everyone recommended this to me. Well, not everyone, but like I got some recommendations, or I got some people shouting this book out as like something that I would enjoy, because I did. It's true. The next book that I read was Quicksand by Nella Larson. Nella Larson wrote the book Passing, and her writing during the early 20th century, which is when she was like active as a writer, wasn't that well known or circulated. Like much great art of the time, was not recognized by her peers as what it was, but this book, Quicksand, was pretty excellent in my opinion. It was very on par with a lot of the like 19th century, early 20th century fiction about women coming of age, coming into themselves, like very Theodore Dreiser, Portrait of a Lady-esque, very Gilded Age, Harlem Renaissance vibes, because it follows this young woman who is a Black American, and she goes to these different cities, lives out her life in these different ways, figures out her positionality as like a young Black woman. And she's pretty light, I'm pretty sure. Working class, and she has these different jobs throughout this book, and she has these different like little romances and whatnot. She's just trying to figure out her place in the world, what she likes, what she doesn't like. Each different community or city or like position that she finds herself in, she ends up being unhappy or unsatisfied with at some point, and then like moves. And it was a little delightful, a little frustrating in the way that a lot of these books tend to be, and it was a quick read, and it was really interesting, and I think it's an underrated short classic, and I rated it 4 stars. I liked it. The next book that I read was another 20th century classic about a young woman going through her life in different places in a semi-unhinged way, and that is Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. I also listened to the audiobook version of this through the Libro FM program, so thank you to them again. This book was fucking insane. My God, was this book crazy. You know, it was, widely circulated, very popular novel that emerged from the lesbian feminist indie presses of like the 70s, and became mainstream because of how cuckoo it was. And you can really see that when you read this now from a 21st century perspective. And it truly is like the embodiment in a novel of like being a problematic lesbian feminist, thespian lemonist, one of those vintage lesbian pins of this time. This is like autofiction, and it's so funny. Our main character, Molly, is so silly and goofy and hilarious, and she is like an anti-hero heroine, and the ethics of this book are simultaneously questionable and laudable. It's so interesting. A lot of things that she does, it's like, girl, what? And a lot of things that she does, it's like, LOL, slayed. It's so, I don't know, it's a joy to read, but it's also so frustrating. There's so many scenes that I was like, what? And there are so many scenes that I was like, this is a conversation that happened yesterday on Twitter. This is a conversation that happened at a lesbian bar last night. Like, there's so many things that I was like, this is so hilariously still relevant. You can see the legacies of lesbian feminism and like the ways that women's sexualities and feminisms have moved and not changed or has changed throughout time. It's a really interesting historical text looking at like queerness and stuff. I liked it, and I thought it was a romp. It was a total fucking romp, and very problematic. Like, let me warn you, it is problematic. And the next book that I read was another gay woman problematic book, and that is Big Swiss by Jen Began. This is another book that I read through the Libro FM program, and I liked this one a lot. I rated it 4 stars. So Big Swiss is about a woman who becomes really obsessed with another woman. And the reason why she becomes obsessed with this other woman, whom she calls Big Swiss in her mind, is because our main character starts working for a sex therapist named Ohm as a transcriber of the therapy sessions in the small town, or the functionally small town of Hudson, New York, where the entire population is made up of, like, people who own / attend microbreweries and like are really committed to the goat cheese, sex therapy, farmer's market lifestyle. So It's like that, right? And so our main character becomes really obsessed with this woman who is one of the clients of her boss, Ohm. And this woman is someone whom she names in her mind as Big Swiss. Because obviously she doesn't like know who these people actually are. She doesn't know their names because there's like a double blind confidentiality agreement situation here, NDA, in order for her to like do her job of transcribing therapy sessions, like sex therapy sessions. And she has like a Swiss accent, which is why she calls her Big Swiss, and she like imagines her / knows her to be very tall through this therapy sessions. She has a husband. She is a little bit cuckoo crazy, and so is our main character, obviously. So our main character becomes super obsessed with Big Swiss, and we see everything play out. One day they like run into each other at like the dog park or something, and as soon as Big Swiss opens her mouth and speaks, our main character is like, that's Big Swiss, I know her. And they become like friends, but because our main character is like obsessed with her in like a sexual way, it's weird for many reasons, but like specifically as well for the reason of she knows all of her sex therapy session things, but like that's a secret, right? Like you can't just be like, oh, we're friends now, like you want to be friends, by the way, I transcribe your therapy sessions. So it's like a whole situation, and it's a really funny and weird book that feels very strung together and like lacking in cohesion in a way that still makes so much sense and is so random but perfect in its randomness in so many ways. And it has a lot of humor and lightheartedness and a focus on like the sexuality and humor of women that I find really charming. And Jen Began's work is very much about that, I feel. Yeah, I really fucked with this and I rated it 4 stars. The next book that I read, or the next book that I finished, was a nonfiction, like, textbook, essentially, for a class, which was A Queer History of the United States by Michael Bronski. This book was really interesting and comprehensive. Not necessarily always correct, but very interesting in its comprehensiveness. Doesn't really talk that much about trans history, so you should probably read it alongside Susan Stryker's book about trans history in the US if you want to know about like actual like queer history in the US in like the more comprehensive way. But yeah, I thought it was solid and I rated it 3.5 stars, but also it has the underlying like liberalism of, you know, academic white queers. So, and it has some outdated terms from like the 2010s and whatnot. I thought it was solid, but not perfect by any means. And yeah, I learned some really interesting things though. The next book that I read was Black Swans by Eve Babbitt. And honestly, like, all of her writing has melded together in my mind. Every book that I've read by Eve Babbitt, or like every piece of writing by Eve Babbitt that I read, has become the same Eve Babbitt's story in my head. But I thought this was solid. I rated it 3 stars. I think like her writing is really engrossing in this way that is so like unique and so like LA and 20th century woman who is really into Joan Didion vibes and is rubbing shoulders and elbows with the Hollywood elite of the time vibes, and it shines through, and I thought it was you know, pretty slayful. I rated it 3 stars. I think I like her book LA Woman more. So, yeah, but the cover is gorgeous. I enjoyed this, and yeah, I feel like each of the different short stories in here aren't that unique or identifiable to me or memorable in their specific ways, but they're just certain scenes and certain, you know, just like moments and sentences and like ways of describing the world that are really funny and interesting throughout here. Like, for example, in her short story Tangoland, which I liked that short story a lot, actually. The whole country was off on this Reagan roll. Dreadful trumped up cities. Trumped as in capital T, like Donald Trump. But especially LA, a city built on the premise that downtown was unnecessary, suddenly had one. We were rolling in traffic, quaint old neighborhoods fell to improvements, and people squeezed out of Central and South American countries by fear and poverty fought their way to paradise. Us, LA. LA made its kids afraid of the future. The poverty of values trickled down to the streets. It was all a curse in 80s clothing. So it's just like really fun things like that, just cultural observations of the late 20th century. The next book that I read was a science fiction / speculative novel called Terra Nullius by Claire G. Coleman. This was pretty excellent. I rated it 3.5 stars / 4 stars because I found some elements of it simplistic because it's trying to be like campy in some ways and satirical perhaps, but also very real. The title of it comes from the legal justification of the colonization of Australia. And Claire Coleman is an Aboriginal writer who is really interested in her writing and in her exploration of like the history of the settler colonial like invasion of Australia, exploring that history and that reality. But this book does it in such a way that like is very twisty and speculative and on the nose, but in a way that is like, whoa. It has a very Wild West energy to it that I fuck with, and I think like it's approachable enough for anyone to read and enjoy it, but it's kind of bloody in this way that like if you're an action movie fan, you would like this. If you go into this with no expectations at all, except for the underlying understanding that like this is going to focus on the issue of the history of settler colonialism in Australia, like it'll be a fascinating time for you as a reader. I rated this 3.5 stars, 4 stars. I just can't spoil it because the twist is so good. Like, the next book that I read was Bliss Montage by Ling Ma, which is a short story collection, and I found this short story collection somewhat disappointing, but still good. You know what I mean? Like, you know when you have such high expectations that even when something is good, it's not like good enough for what you were hoping for it to be? That's how I felt about this, because it wasn't as memorable. Like, these stories weren't as memorable and stand out as I wanted them to be. They were kind of mid in that way. But as short stories and as a short story collection, it was good, you know? It just wasn't, like, fantastic to me. So it was, like, a 3-star read for me. The different stories were interesting. One of them, I think one of my favorites, was this one about this woman who sees that her rapist is dating a woman who is dating this woman, and she is stalking him, and she's trying to figure out what to do about the fact that he is dating this other woman, like about confronting them, like not really sure. I thought that was interesting. There's this one short story about this woman who like lives in a house with all her ex-boyfriends or all her boyfriends. I thought this was interesting, and I will be reading anything else Ling Ma comes out with, because Severance was solid, and this is solid as well, but I don't think as good as Severance. But yeah, the cover is gorgeous though, and like the moments of exploring these familial relationships and these relationships to lovers and mothers and other people that really did touch and hit, like really did, you know? So yeah. The next book that I read was Slow Days, Fast Company, The World, The Flesh in L.A. by Eve Babbitt, and I rated this 3.5 stars. Very similar thoughts on this as to Black Swan, and these were also more short stories, and these were pretty engrossing. Yeah, same thoughts, I think, as for Black Swans, but oh, I think the titular story of Black Swans, excellent. I really liked that one, I would say, about the hotel room and yeah, I like that one a lot. The next book that I finished in March was Zombie, A New Spelling of My Name, a biomythography by Audre Lorde. It's also somewhat annotated, and I thought this was very good and quite excellent, and I rated it 4 stars, and it's really about Audre Lorde's life, how she came of age, how complicated her relationship to her mother is, her relationship to her political identity, her relationship to coming to terms with her sexual identity, her relationship to disability, and, growing up as a daughter of Grenadian immigrants, and how different family and community dynamics have shaped her for who she is, and the way that this plays with mythography and her own story was interesting and really reflects the, lesbian feminist ethics of the late 20th century, which is when this was published. So very good reading and really essential to understand, like, the canon, I guess. And I'm glad I read this because I really, really love Sister Outsider. The next book that I read is Your Driver is Waiting by Priya Guns. I rated this book 3 stars. This follows this woman who works for an unnamed rideshare company in a unnamed city that is very metropolitan. And we see her as she gets involved or uninvolved in, politics of organizing and, like, labor organizing and immigrants' rights and stuff. She becomes involved with this white woman who comes from wealth and is sort of a well-meaning liberal and works in, like, a nonprofit, and our main character is, like, working like a dog trying to keep up with her bills in her life. Her mom has a debilitating sort of mental health issue and illness because her father, her mother's husband, passed, and that really caused a lot of grief, obviously, for the family, and she sort of exists in this, like, mental break state. And this book is really bogged down, not bogged down, but, like, really is weighed with a lot of dread and anxiety, and there's a constant feel of, like, the bills and gas money and being stuck in traffic and clients who won't pay and riders in her car who are terrible, and all these protests that she sees day after day in the streets, the different organizers that are in her life, the way that her romance with this white woman affects all of these things. It was very anxiety inducing to read. I see what it was trying to do, and I respect it. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the anxiety aspect of it. I thought it was, immersive and embody the psyche of our main character, who is, like, really deeply resilient. But I also found it frustrating because of the way that, like, she really folded to this, like, woman, this random ass white lady in such a way. But that's whatever. I rated it 3 stars. I didn't think it was phenomenal. It wasn't a standout. It was solid. I had some gripes with it, but whatever, Also, I listened to this audiobook when I was in New York City, so it felt very immersive as a reading experience. These next couple books are also books that I read when I was in New York, but these are books that I physically read on the subway, actually, which I think is my favorite type of reading to do. I love to read on the subway. Not to be corny, but I love to do it so much. With a little paperback, like... The next book that I read was Separate and Dominate, Feminism and Racism After the War on Terror by Christine Delphi. This book was excellent. It's a collection of essays, obviously, about feminism and Islamophobia and imperialism. It is translated from French, so this is a French feminist, contemporary feminist, talking about, like, US and Western war crimes in Afghanistan, in the War on Terror, of course, in the hijab bans in France, and the implications for that on a feminist level, in regards to racism. She examines these issues of, anti-feminism, racism, and homophobia in this way that I found really compelling and smart. And she gets at it in a way that's straightforward and intelligent and articulate. And it's very much like this French feminist perspective, and there are some footnotes that talks about the specific legal and social, situations and terms and stuff that brought about these essays, the social context in which they emerge, but I found all of these very compelling and such an interesting and necessary look at like contemporary feminism, and it was really, you know, constitutive and contributive text to modern feminism, and I would recommend it. I really liked it, and I thought it was really smart. The next book that I read was a 5-star read. Oh wait, yeah, also this is a 5-star read, like fucking amazing. Maybe that's why I loved reading on the subway so much, because it was all fucking 5-star reads, bitch. Like, the next book that I read was Post Traumatic by Chantal V. Johnson, and it says back here that she was the 2018 Center for Fiction Emerging Writers Fellow, and I bought this at the Center for Fiction in Brooklyn, so I don't even know if that's what that means, but anyways, I found this book incredible. I wrote a review about this on this, and I wrote a comparative review of this and this book called Itza, and I'm thinking about publishing it to our podcast's Substack. If it's up, I'll link it here or below. If it's not up, let me know in the comments if you want it to be. Anyways, this book is amazing. It's a disaster girl novel, but in a way that I've never seen before. In a way that is new, refreshing, brings something to the table that I just am astonished by, and I just lived for. I love how witty, hilarious, unapologetic, acerbic, sharp, and cutting this was. I loved its observations on social interactions and human behavior and the ways that people perceive each other and interact in regards to like psychological issues, but also just like on a racial level, on a gendered level, in terms of like sexuality and navigating sort of snooty upper class white people spaces, and I thought it was brilliant. Our main character is a Black woman lawyer who works at a psychiatric institution defending people who are held in psychiatric wards because she doesn't believe in the psychiatric institution as like a legitimate thing, in a way that I think is articulated very, very interestingly and well throughout this. And she has a really complicated relationship with her family, and she has this best friend named Jane whom she smokes a lot of weed with, and she has this crippling weed addiction, which is hilarious to read about, honestly, like real. And she also is stuck in this cycle, in this process of like contorting herself into something for male pleasure and consumption, and the way that this gets all articulated and the way that we get sucked into her psyche and how just paranoid she is constantly because of how traumatized she is fascinating and compelling and moving and funny in such a dark, twisted way that I, as just like a cunt to my core, just ate up. So I love this. I rated it 5 stars. It's not gonna be for everyone, but as a certified problematic bitch, I ate this up. So I love this. The next book that dude, I've been recording for nearly 90 minutes now. Like, this is a feature-length film, this video. My God. Something about me is I will not shut the fuck up about books. Anyways, the next book that we're almost done. Are we? No, because now we're getting into April. Yeah, Post Traumatic was the first book that I finished in April. So now this is the second book that I finished in April, and that was another Libro FM influencer audiobook, and that was The Big Reveal, an illustrated manifesto of drag by Sasha Velour. I actually haven't looked at the illustrations, which is sad because she's a comic artist, or they are. Is Sasha Velour's pronouns they, them? They talk about it in the book, so I don't remember. But I do remember so many other parts of this book because it was excellent. I'm not a drag race girl. I'm not a drag queen girl. Like, okay, the lawn mowing outside is pissing me off. But anyways, we have to move through this. We have to get through this video. Anyway, there were these drag queen openers for my Chapel Rowan concert that were excellent and so fun. But generally speaking, I don't really, that's like not my thing per se. My podcast co-host / best friend is like really into RuPaul's Drag Race though, and like loves drag, so I respect it. It's just not like my thing per se. So The Big Reveal and like Sasha Velour's memoir about their own experiences growing up as a queer person, as like a trans feminine person, as a non-binary person, as someone who gets involved in the drag scene and becomes a drag queen and is a comic artist, comes from a Jewish family of based communists and labor organizers, and as someone who's been on Drag Race, like, it was such a fascinating memoir. I really enjoyed it. It was really humorous, it was really engaging, obviously narrated by Sasha Velour themselves. It was a really, really fun and great memoir. I rated it 4 stars. It's not, again, my 4-star, 5-star distinction is important to me. So it was very good. I would definitely recommend it, even if you're not into drag at all, because, like, that's kind of me. I think the way that they explained, like, all the different terms, their, you know, involvement in it, how drag is important to them, and obviously it's like such a huge part of like their identity, their career, and what they talk about in this book. So I thought it was all very engaging, you know. The next book that I read was another speculative fiction, science fiction novel, and that was My Volcano by John Elizabeth Stinson. This is all marked up because I needed to mark this shit up because I found it annoying as fuck, and this was the only way that I was gonna be able to like get through it, and I had to read it for class, so like I needed to find the patterns and use color codes. And yeah, I rated it 2 stars. It was boring in a way that was like, you know, when too many things are happening and because so many wild things are happening and just shit is getting thrown at you left, right, center, every other page is some crazy shit is happening, all of it just starts becoming nothing to you. And also it's like so obviously from like a white gay, white trans perspective, and the writing just really shines through in that way because it's trying to be this global perspective. It was kind of like that. It was 2 stars for me. I know what it was trying to do regarding like capitalism and criticizing like shit like that. Like, the concept, if I'm gonna get into that, is that this volcano sprouts out of nowhere in Central Park, and then there's these random other volcanoes that start sprouting out of nowhere in these different parts of the world, I'm pretty sure, and also simultaneously this other thing is happening, like the spread of this like mutation thing is happening all across like Western China, and we see all of this. It follows all these different perspectives, so many different perspectives and characters. There's a white trans writer, there's these professors in like seismology or something, there's someone who works as like an advertiser person who is a trans mask white dude named like Ashton or some shit like that. I don't know, it was kind of mid to me, to be honest, but I thought it was like fun at points. Other times I was just like trying to skim to get through it, you know. But I feel like this is a book that for some people would really work for them. It's kind of campy. Maybe this is a book that like is for someone who enjoys, what's the John Green book or the Hank Green book about those statues that appear out of nowhere? It's like that meets Jitterbug Perfume. I've not read that book, but someone wrote a comparative analysis review about those 2 novels, about this novel and Jitterbug Perfume, because John Elizabeth Stinson was very obviously inspired by that 80s romp novel for this. So anyways, I thought it was something. Yeah. The next book that I read was a mystery novel, and I liked it. This book is called What's the Matter with Mary Jane? An Epitome Apartments Mystery by Candace Jane Dorsey. I think this is the second book in the series. I hadn't read the first book because the second book was available to me as an audiobook through Libby, the library app that I have through Overdrive on my phone. But the first audiobook was not, for some reason. I don't really think it affected my reading of this audiobook that much. I mean, there were a lot of references to, like, not a lot, but, like, references to the consequences of the things that happened in the first book throughout this book, obviously, but it didn't really interrupt my reading or enjoyment of it in any real significant way. But this book had that funny, acerbic tone and this, like, queer woman's main character's perspective that I just love and eat up every time in a mystery thriller novel. And it's set in like Toronto or something like that, and it features like the real fantasy element, which is ethical billionaires. Or not billionaires plural, but like basically she gets involved in some situation because this woman who has not been in her life in a long time shows up at her doorstep and is like, some weird shit is happening, can you please help me solve the situation? And our main character is like, I'm not a detective, I'm not a PI, do not look at me. And she's like, please, I know that you helped out this other person this last time and I heard about it, can you please help me? And she's like, oh god, please. But eventually like comes around to it, finds out that she's involved with some guy, like something. Anyway, shit goes down. I thought it was memorable. It was fun. It was a romp, but it was also kind of crazy. And obviously crimes are involved. Stalking, murder, financial crimes. I thought it was funny, solid, and well written. So, 4 stars. And the next book that I read in April, and I basically read it over the course of like a weekend, was Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg. God, what can you say about this book that hasn't already been said? Life-changing, incredible, moving, the Bible, no book has ever been more important, probably, like, queer history, labor history, trans history, lesbian history, it's here. Like, this is a book that everyone needs to read, and Leslie Feinberg knew that. Feinberg wouldn't have been so presumptuous to have thought that, but like Feinberg made it available to anyone because it's for free online. I just have a bound physical copy because I'm an extra bit. I found it at my local St. Louis bookstore, so I was gonna pick it up, you know. Yeah, I thought it doesn't matter what I thought because it's brilliant and it's incredible and it makes you cry and it makes you laugh and it brings you through, yeah, it's so everything, and it follows, it's another, like, autofiction type lesbian story. It follows our main character, Jess, who is basically a stand-in for Leslie Feinberg, ? Are we seeing a common thread in, like, lesbian literature from, like, the 20th century? For everything from Zombie by Audre Lorde to Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown to this, like, these bitches are writing about themselves, but, like, in like a, but was it real kind of way? I love lesbians. This book follows Jess, who is a young dyke who's Jewish, who lives in like suburban / rural New York State and grows up there in the like 1950s or something like that, 40s. I forget things. And basically we see them come of age. We see her come of age. We see her go through a lot of trauma, okay? Trigger warnings galore for this book. There is this book is traumatic as fuck. It is packed with some pretty explicit scenes of like police brutality and violence in the bar raids of like the gay bars of this time, because of course it was like the early to mid 20th century. You know, that this is a real depiction of things that were happening, right? There's just like incredible amounts of just abuse and sexual violence. And Feinberg himself sort of discusses it at the beginning in the prologue of the book, because and sort of speaks to the way that there is a lot of violence in this, but it's not gratuitous. It's an honest depiction of what happened and what does happen. And it is just, God, this book, I could talk about it forever, so I'm just gonna stop there. But obviously 5 stars, 100 stars, the fuck? So the next book that I read in the month of April was one that I kind of binge listened to on 420 and then the next day, and that was Sam by Allegra Goodman. Actually, not the next day. I think I just like stayed up late and finished listening to it because I was really engrossed by this book, honestly. It's a contemporary fiction literary novel that follows this woman, this young girl named Sam, from her childhood up until her adulthood. We just see her coming of age, and we see her relationship to her family, her friends, her, just her life. And like she gets into rock climbing at a young age. We see that. We see her complicated relationship to her musician traveler father, who is not together with her mom, and her mom basically being like a single mom, but getting involved with like another man later in her life, as when she gets older as a kid, and like the tumult of being this working class kid and, you know, trying to see what she can do with her life, and the complicated relationships and romantic things and stuff that emerge from like being at the climbing gym all the time, and her relationship to, you know, her father, and to climbing, and to her friends, and to, you know, money and gender. And it's just really interesting. You know, I found it so compelling in ways that I can't really explain, because it just felt so real and gritty and raw and well written in a way that was like, this is just the story of a girl's life, and it's not remarkable necessarily, but because it is quite ordinary, or ordinary, whose life is really ordinary, like, it is remarkable. And I think the way that it is told, and the way that these themes, and well, not even themes, like the things that happen in her life and that can happen to anyone's life, you know, evolve and get played out throughout this novel, are really interesting and really smart. And I found it very, very well done. So I rated it 4 stars. The next book that I read was really good, actually, by Monica Halsey, which I also rated 4 stars. So I had a pretty good, like, a pretty goddamn excellent April reading month, to be quite honest and to be fair. This book is a contemporary commercial novel that follows this young divorcee as she's in the midst of trying to figure the fuck out being a young divorcee. She can feel her friends getting sick of her because she's depressed as a divorcee. She is struggling, trying to date. What does that mean? She's bisexual. She is a fucking mess. Like a total fucking mess. And we just see her be a mess and be just like a woman in her 20s and like try to collect her life together. And I think she has like an office job as well, and like that's a little bit of a wreck as well because of her whole emotional state. And we see just her deal with it through her humor, through her her being a disaster and really funny about it. And I thought it was kind of a delight, and done in such a tender but also just sharp way that I found so engrossing and compelling, and just excellent in a way that I really honestly did not expect. I was taken aback by how good I found this, and that's kind of why I rated it 4 stars, I would say. Like, I thought it was a really interesting and compelling portrait of a woman who is falling apart, but like is doing a job of it in a way that kind of cracks you up and is so relatable even if you're not a young divorcee. Like, I found it like ordinarily, the way that it sort of looks at an ordinary situation, you know, friends break up, friends get married, but I'm right where you left me. Like, breakups happen every day. You don't have to lose it. It's that type of vibe. But she's a girl who lives in delusion, and it's a delight because that's real as fuck, but it's also not done in like a hokey way, I don't think. And there are so many like cringe scenes that we're like, oof, girl, you are a mess, get your life together. But like, that's the point, you know? So yeah. The next book that I read in April was The Transgender Issue, An Argument for Justice by Sean Fay, which I rated 4 stars. It is a book by a transgender woman who is from the UK in Britain. I listened to the audiobook of this, which is narrated by her, and it delineates a lot of really crucial frameworks for trans justice and the existence of trans people in contemporary life, from like a legal framework, from just like a social framework, from the way that the transgender issue is framed specifically, like particularly in British media, and how that is really detrimental to real life, like people. And real life children and families, and also the ways and in which people should be, or like what are more, valuable approaches or, contributive ways of looking at the trans issue and what the priorities like should be surrounding this. And I think like all the different arguments are really articulated pretty well. There were some points that I was like, I think you could have explained that more, or I was like, I think that argument might fall apart a little bit with more scrutiny, or I just would disagree with some details and such like that. But otherwise, I found like 95% of this very thoroughly well researched, well argued, correct, smart, and a pretty good to intermediate place to start even, or like to enter or to pick up as a good way of approaching contemporary trans, feminist, and just sort of LGBT issues. And for Pride Month, you should definitely read this. Anyways, the next book that I read was, actually, these were all like gay ass books. The fuck? The next book that I read in April, oh wait, no, now we're in May. The next book I read in May was a Libro FM influencer audiobook, and that they really carried. Like, they carried my 2022? Girl, it's 2023. My 2023 reading year so far. Nothing new, but anyways, The Fiancé Farce by Alexandra Bellafleur. Now, I just don't think I vibe with this woman's writing. I rated it 2 stars. I found it corny, and I found it a little beyond unrealistic. Like, okay, it's a contemporary romance novel. It's gonna be fucking unrealistic. But does it have to be like, I don't know. The whole premise of it is that this woman who like works at a bookstore that her like family ran and was left to her stepmom after her dad like passed, was after like her bio parents passed, is potentially getting sold, and it's like, whoa, no, Amazon taking over the bookstores. I think it's set in Seattle as well. Alexandra Bellafleur is a big Seattle girly, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, our main character is like a sort of a plain Jane girl, and she ends up telling people that, like, because she's had a terrible time with dating, she just tells people that she's dating this woman whom she just like knows as like an Instagram model, not an Instagram model, but actually a romance novel model, like someone who's posed for the cover of romance books. She just says the name of that girl, and it's like, yeah, she's my girlfriend. And like people just think this is true for 6 months. She goes to like her stepsister or something's wedding or like engagement party or some shit. No, wedding at the very beginning of the book, and everyone is like, oh, like, so who are you dating? And then the person that she's supposedly dating, that lady walks the fuck in, and she's like, oh god, this is so embarrassing. But then she goes along with it. She's actually like low-key an heiress, and she's involved with like, she's the sister of our main character's ex-boyfriend, who was a total douchebag to her in high school. Like, it's a whole situation, and it's just, I don't know. I mean, 2 stars because it was memorable at least. But I don't know. I think contemporary romance has to be very particular for me to write it, for me to fuck with it, because right now we're looking at like a 90% failure rate right now of like flops of contemporary romances. And it's not even like, and they're all like female romances too, but also my gripe with female romances are that they're always like femme for femme, or they're always like 2 bisexual girlies, and I'm like, I'm literally a lesbian, and I'm literally a femme for butch lesbian. Why is all this sapphic fiction? Why is all this lesbian romance novels not even lesbian? Like, none of the lesbian couples I know in my real life are 2 bisexual girls or 1 bi girl and 1 lesbian, really. I can't think of any, honestly, off the top of my head. Most of them are 2 lesbians, and a lot of them are butch femme, or like 1 masc and 1 femme. Like, people who are writing these romance novels, this is my major gripe with female romances and contemporary romances in particular. What? Because historical romances, it's like different. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, different standards, different settings. Like, it's the 19th century, it's the 18th century, like, whatever. Guys, I don't believe in this. And also the billionaire romance trope, I don't, God. And obviously the majority of straight romance, like, just straight romances out there are just total fucking trash fire. So, and just like abuse apology to the max. So, anyways, it's so hard being a lesbian feminist, feminist, like femme lesbianist, femme lesbian, feminist, reader these days who wants to have fun, okay? The next book that I read was another Livre Femme influencer book, another Suffolk romance type story. But this one was cute. You know why? Because it was like a middle grade YA, and it wasn't solely about like romance necessarily. And this book is called Never Trust a Gemini by Freya Nicole Wolf. And it's about this little girl, this 14-year-old girl, 15-year-old, I don't know. This girlie who is in love with her best friend, who is gorgeous and beautiful and like heterosexual. And our main character is closeted, and she is really into drawing like Disney princess fan art, so cute. And she has like a precocious 12-year-old sister, and her precocious 12-year-old sister is like a vegan and like an activist type, and our main character is kind of just like a little bit of a ditz. And, you know, into astrology, obviously, never trust a Gemini, but she ends up like becoming friends with this new girl who's a little bit goth, a little bit tomboyish, I think, and she is a bit of a bad girl type at their new school. But our main character is in the popular girl clique, like a little bit, the mean girl clique, but like it's not very serious. It's not like in a serious way, and so that sort of has some tension arise. But it was really sweet. It was cute. It was funny, pretty adorable. So yeah, I rated it 3 stars. Next book that I read was a fantasy novel called Arch Conspirator by Veronica Roth, which I rated 3 stars, and it was sort of a dystopian, futuristic retelling of the story of Antigone. And it was solid. It was okay. I thought that the premise and the delivery were 3 stars, which is why it was a 3-star book for me. It was very short, and it didn't really talk about like the characters in any meaningful way, but that's not really the nature of Greek myths, is it? It's about their relationship dynamics and the stakes of them more so than like the actual characters themselves. It's more about like why they are attached to each other and the ways that they are, why they are loyal to the ways that they are. But like the twist of this one being like it's set in this like climate apocalypse future, I think that twist to it was interesting. I don't know if it was that engrossing for me. I do enjoy the story of Antigone, and I enjoy retellings of it, and I don't know if this was the most successful one. It definitely wasn't the most successful one that I've seen. So yeah, 3 stars. Guys, we're getting so close to the end. The next book that I read in May was The Lost Wife by Susanna Moore. And this is set in the 19th century, and it's based off of like a true story kind of about this woman who like travels west to escape like an abusive husband kind of. And it is very interesting. It's about this woman who starts living with these Native Americans out like west as there's ongoing wars happening with the settlers, and also like the Civil War is happening as well. So it's a really, really interesting historical fiction novel from like a woman's perspective, and about like the Gilded Age in a way that was in a short book. Like it was kind of more of a novella length, but it was done well. It felt very grounded in the times of its era. It also had a perspective and approach that was really interesting and well researched, I think, and it was pretty compelling, especially as a historical fiction novel, which sometimes can be boring, you know? And I thought this one was pretty good and pacey and focused on different dynamics and exploitative ones and characters who were really interesting and legal processes that were actually happening during the 1848 and whatnot in the US, you know, before the US was even a thing, because, you know, Western settlement, etc. And it was a really interesting like immersive experience of you know, being the lost wife. The next book that I read was a nonfiction book called You Just Need to Lose Weight and 19 Other Myths About Fat People by Aubrey Gordon, which I rated 4 stars because I thought this was a really solid book about the myth of diet culture, weight loss, fitness, the pop culture misconceptions of like health, wellness, and, you know, all these things in a way that was done pretty well. And it's written by the host of a podcast called Maintenance Phase. I thought that this book was a good encapsulation of like a breakdown of what is happening in sort of fat activist circles, or, you know, the short snappy talking points in responses to fat-phobic talking points and comments, and the ways that, you know, like, people want to deny how fat phobia manifests in like very real ways in the world, and why it's like not a real problem or shouldn't be considered a real problem because fat people should just lose weight, hence the title of this book. It's very necessary, I think, as a book, and it's also aware of itself as being not the end-all be-all of this book, and I liked it. I thought it was really well-researched and snappy and forthcoming as a nonfiction book should be. So, yeah. The next book that I read was a short story collection, speculative fiction book, which I want to rate like 4.5 stars, it's 4 stars right now, but like probably 4.5 stars because the stories that I love in it are so good, but there's some stories that I'm like, this is just mid as fuck to me, in my opinion. And that is White Cat, Black Dog by Kelly Link. Kelly Link is such a hit or miss writer for me because some of her short stories are just like such fucking bangers, and some others I'm like, you're just missing the tone for me, babes. Like, this isn't giving, this isn't delivering for me, you know? And this short story collection is a bunch of different retellings of like sort of niche fairy tales, but they're retellings in ways that are very niche in it of themselves, and they are so compelling and interesting and humorous and imaginative. I thought that out of a lot of these stories, many of them were so good, so memorable. The Prince Hat one was great. The like Snow White one, the last one I think, was really great. The first one was great. Oh, I thought The White Road was excellent. So yeah, it's just like a range that some really worked for me and some just were like a total miss. But, you know, that's how a lot of short stories collections work. And Kelly, the ones that really worked, you know? Like, I love fairy tale retellings that are smart. They're smart. And Kelly Link, if nothing else, she is a smart writer. And that's why she's one of the, like, pioneers of the new weird as a genre. Like, come on now. The next book that I read was a comic book graphic novel called Death Threats by Vivek Shreya. It's autobiographical, so it's just about Vivek Shreya getting death threats. And it's very beautifully illustrated, and it's a really gorgeous graphic novel, but it's sort of meta-narrative in a way that I was like, is this really working for me? I don't know. It's like really about the harassment that they face for being like a trans feminine person on the internet and as being a writer. I thought the way that it was illustrated was really gorgeous, but I don't know if... I think like the storytelling technique and the way that it was conveyed was also pretty original and interesting in some ways, but in other ways, I think towards the end it sort of fell off for me, so I rated it 3 stars. The next book that I read in the month of May was Evil Flowers by Gunhild Oyhag, and this is a very short story collection, translated from like Swedish or some shit, right? And this was really interesting. I rated it like 3.5 stars, 4 stars. I thought that this was like speculative and weird in that Icelandic way that just cannot be replicated. Each one of these short stories was just like so fucking weird in a way that like how do people think of these things? But it was brilliant. Like, it was really smart in so many ways. One of the first short story really hooked me because it was about this woman who, like, is forgets what birds are, but she is someone who, like, has to defend her thesis. She's like a PhD student or something like that on birds in, like, the next few weeks. Because basically in the first short story, like, she sneezed and, like, part of her brain fell out. Oops, hate it when that happens. And the bird part of her brain, like, the part of her brain that, like, knows everything about birds, is no longer there anymore. And so, yikes, because she has to defend her dissertation on birds, on, like, this one particular type of bird and, like, this one function of a bird in, like, 3 weeks. So and she can't tell anyone. She has a young daughter and she has a husband and, like, parents. She can't tell anyone about her experience with this, obviously, because it's crazy. And I just thought this short story collection was really fun. I think the audiobook narrator was good. I think that the cover is fantastic. And it's a great, like, getting high, trippy story collection. The next book that I read was another comic/graphic novel called Coyote Dog Girl by Lisa Hanawalt. I thought it was fun. It was problematic in the way that Westerns are. It was 3 stars for me, and you can just tell that this is coming from a person who, like, helped create BoJack Horseman. I thought it was funny. It made me laugh out loud in some times because of how absurd it was. In other ways, I was like, this is a little too much. And in other ways, I was like, is this problematic because of the way that you're depicting native cultures and peoples as, like, animals? I know every character is an animal here, but, like, just, I don't know. Anyways, it was fun. It was problematic. Yeah, I don't know. I rated it 3 stars. The art style was cute. I read another graphic novel called This Is How I Disappear by Marian Mal, and this was translated from French, I believe. I rated it 4 stars, or it's set in Canada. I don't remember. I read it literally the other day, but I was really, really tired because I read it in the middle of the night. But I really liked this. It made me really emotional. It's about this woman who's struggling a lot with depression. She works at a publishing agency or, like, a publishing house, getting paid, like, minimum wage, working really hard. We see her day-to-day life. Like, she's becoming more and more distant from her friends because of how depressed she is. And the ending of it made me cry. It was really touching. So, yeah. And the next book I read at the end of May was I Think I Am in Friend Love with You by Yumi Sakugawa, which was a really short graphic novel about being in friend love with someone. Like, it was very much like, no homo, bro. Like, I like you, but not like that. Which I thought was cute. It was whatever, you know. Quick read. And then I read another short story collection, translated short story collection called Sweet Lust by Asja Bakik. I rated it 4.5 stars. It was so good. I read her other short story collection, Mars, like earlier this year. I don't remember. That was also pretty good, but this short story collection, fucking excellent. Wow. The titular short story, Sweet Lust, is set in this future world in which there are no longer any men due to a testicular cancer or something like that, like, rapidly moving disease, wiping all of them out from the face of the earth. And I think, like, it's implied that our main character, or maybe not testicular, but, like, some sort of apocalyptic event that, like, wipes out men from existence. Our main character, I'm pretty sure, is written to be coded as, or, like, is trans feminine, and, like, is a trans woman. So anyways, but she becomes inundated, or, like, starts plotting against this company called Sweet Lust, which is basically like a Disneyland for women to sort of enact out their romantic fantasies and their sexual fantasies with men, because now that there are no men on Earth, it's like, we have a replacement fantasy land for men. And so she's like, oh, this is bad and anti-feminist and stupid. Like, we need to destroy this from the inside. So we see that. That was a really fun short story. There was a short story in this one about a time machine and this young woman scientist. It's very speculative, socialist, feminist, and it was originally written in Bosnian, I believe, and it was really smart and really interesting. I really liked it. It was super engaging for me. And finally, the last book I read in May was Idle Burning by Rin Usami, which I rated 3 stars. It's about this girly who is obsessed with a J-pop idol, and then like we see her downfall as she, as a schoolgirl, goes through a lot after he leaves the group, or the group like falls apart or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's translated from Japanese, and the ethics of the book itself, I'm like, interesting. But I thought it was solid. I rated it 3 stars, and I don't know. I don't think there's that much to say about it besides the fact that, like, it's an interesting manifestation and examination of, like, fan culture in, like, young women, and the ways that, like, criticism and defending and deflecting someone from criticism who exists in the public eye in that way can, like, encompass your whole life. I feel like as parasocial relationships and like social media dominates more and more of people's lives and identities, with the internet being what it is now and being so ubiquitous, like we're gonna get more and more books that really explore this theme of like girls who are obsessed with a celebrity and like what that means for their lives on like an international scale. Because the next book that I read, the one that I finished today on the first day of June, was very similar in theme, and it was called Y/N by Esther Yi, and it's about this woman, this Korean woman who lives in Berlin, who becomes really obsessed with this K-pop star named Moon, and then like moves to Seoul to try to find him, and like crazy shit happens. It's really surreal, and I rated it 3.5 stars. I thought it was better than Idol Burning, but yeah. Anyways, those are all of the fucking books that I read from January till now, the first day of June. So 6 months of reading, and that it's been 2 hours of filming for me. More than 2 hours. Let me fucking count how many books I just went through. I got through more books more rapidly towards the end, so because I just got tired. And I know people are gonna comment down below, or like people have commented before, this girl talks too long about books. Talking too much. Bye. Like, okay, yeah, you can fuck off. I get it. So yeah, I just wrapped up 50 books, the past 50 books that I read this year. I am behind on my reading challenge for sure, because I changed my reading challenge. Oh, I'm only 2 books behind, because I changed my reading challenge from like something ridiculous to something a little less ridiculous, which is 150 books for this year, and I'm 60 books into it, which means I'm 2 books behind on my reading schedule, on my reading challenge. So yeah. I don't know. I should do a mid-year check-in of like how many genres am I reading from, what is the demographic breakdown of the authors I'm reading, like that type of thing. But if you're interested in that at all. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end, if you have. And if you have watched it to this point, let's do something fun the way that like Kayla does sometimes. Why don't you, if you have the updated like iOS, if you have an iPhone or something, I don't know if Android has this, but there's like the hyacinth or the purple flower emoji that isn't lavender but kind of looks like lavender. You should comment that emoji down below, or like write the word lavender, because Lavender Menace podcast, my podcast, and also the Lavender Menace just as a lesbian pride, LGBT Pride Month thing. If you're here still, we love the gays. We love trans people. Comment down below. Something with lavender in it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. And let me know, what are any of your thoughts on these books if you have read them? And if you haven't, if you want to read any of these, if you've heard any other opinions on these that differ or are similar to mine. But yeah, that's all I have for you today, she says 2 hours later. And I'll see you in my next video. Okay, bye!